Let's start with a little recap and ask ourselves the question, what actually is knowledge? Now, we discussed this at length in the knowledge flow video, but let's just recap for the sake of clarity. Essentially, knowledge is the ability for us to structure the building blocks of reality in such a way that we get our desired outcomes. So, for example, let's say that I really want to build a square. Then knowledge is knowing how to put these 4 tiny squares together in such a way that I can get my desired. That is all that knowledge is. We are currently at situation A. I want to go to situation B. How do I get there? A step before that is actually knowing what pattern do I want. If I'm at point A, what should point B be? And that is where we have wisdom is knowing what pattern do I want? And then knowledge is knowing what do I actually need to do in order to get there. And then, of course, after we know what to do, what to get there, we have to execute, which is actually doing it. And then this execution and knowledge together forms our production capacity. And we discussed this at length in the Project Tracker video if you want to learn more about that. So in a nutshell, knowledge is knowing how to structure the objects of reality, the building blocks of reality, into the desired pattern. An important thing to understand about knowledge is that it's always embedded in a constellation of other knowledge. So knowledge never exists in isolation. It's always connected to other knowledge pieces. Simplest way to sort of visualize this is as a knowledge tree. This is an oversimplification, but hopefully it helps you to understand how knowledge is related to each other. So at the bottom, we have our deep core knowledge. These are things that are very deeply ingrained into us. Then on top of that knowledge, we build new layers of knowledge, right? We get a second branch, but this second branch is dependent on this first branch. And just like that, this third branch is also dependent on this second branch. Basically, we have this branching out of knowledge where each branch is dependent on the previous branch, right? This branch only makes sense in the context of this branch. And ultimately, all these little leaves that you see over here only make sense in their particular branch. This also means that knowledge is contextual. So, for example, this leaf over here might make a lot of sense inside of this branch, but it might be absolutely useless if we were to connect it to this branch. So like that, all of the knowledge is connected. Let's take a look at an example. This branch over here is the branch of design, right? So this branch over here is a very deep one, and it's the whole field of design. Then within this field of design, we might have a separate branch, which is called visual design. Right, so design in general could mean designing furniture, it could mean designing infrastructure, but we are going one branch deeper and we're saying, okay, this is the branch of visual design, which is still dependent on the bigger branch of design. Within the second branch of visual design, we might have a concept like color theory, knowing which colors to use in design to evoke certain types of emotions. And then even more granular, inside of color theory, we might have this idea of monochromatic colors, which basically means you're using colors that have a similar shade, right? This concept of monochromatic colors is very valuable in the context of color theory, in the context of visual design, in the context of design in general. This leaf, this idea of monochromatic colors might be absolutely useless when we would relate that to something like plumbing or teaching math, right? Nobody needs a color-coded plumbing. It might be really nice to make all of your plumbing and pipes in the same color, but it doesn't add a lot of value. So this knowledge piece over here is very contextual on the branch that it lives in. So that is sort of to illustrate that all of this knowledge is connected to each other, it's embedded into each other, and it's also reliant on each other, right? So certain pieces of knowledge only make sense in certain contexts.